Let's bring in NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley and NBC News legal analyst Misty Marris to break it all down. Good morning to you both. Lawrence, let's start with you. This was a 6-3 decision split along strictly ideological lines, and it was brief. The ruling did not offer any explanation for how the court reached its decision. However, Justice Brett Kavanaugh issued a separate opinion that appeared to throw doubt on any constitutional violation. So what are the takeaways from this decision? Walk us through it, and how is the Trump administration reacting?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to recall about this is that this is just another example of the Supreme Court blocking a ruling by a federal judge in this kind of emergency context where the Trump administration immediately appeals up to the Supreme Court and says, this is an emergency. How dare this judge block what ICE is doing in Los Angeles in this case? And the Supreme Court majority, which has 6 conservatives, including 3 Trump appointees, basically ruled in favor of the administration. So that's one thing to consider. The second thing is that the court here is basically allowing, as Justice Sotomayor referenced in her dissent, a kind of a form of racial profiling of people in the Los Angeles area, targeted basically because of where they work, whether they speak English, where they're mingling. As Sotomayor said, she thinks, this is going to lead to a lot of people who are American citizens or permanent residents, as there's been evidence in this case that there is, these people being picked up and detained. So, and of course, the Trump administration is seeing this as a major victory. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, said so, and she's saying this now allows ICE to go about its operations in the Los Angeles area without being micromanaged by the courts.
So let's bring Misty into this conversation. Lawrence, as you heard, referenced Justice Sotomayor's strong dissent, which said in part that she would not, quote, stand idly by while our constitutional freedoms are lost. Were you surprised by this decision, and how could this impact ICE raids, ICE operations across the country?
Well, certainly the practical effect is that this decision is going to be used to conduct these similar types of raids using the same standards across the country, even though the decision isn't really clear about the impact on the national footprint because there was no written rationale. There is no decision. However, the Trump administration is going to use this to move forward, not just in Los Angeles, but with other places, because keep in mind, this is a for now. This decision is not final. The cases are still going to work their way through the courts. And Justice Sotomayor, her decision and her dissent was really reflective of the plaintiff's arguments that allowing these factors to be taken into account, like race, accents, speaking Spanish, location, that is basically violating the fundamental principles of the Fourth Amendment when it comes to reasonable suspicion, which in the criminal law context would preclude taking those factors into consideration. So this is a very novel issue that's going to be before the court on those Fourth Amendment principles and still needs that finality. So I imagine the Trump administration will take advantage of this time period at this point.
So let's talk about a separate ruling from yesterday where the Supreme Court allowed President Trump to fire, for now, a member of the Federal Trade Commission, despite what's typically protected by federal protections for these independent agencies. So what are you making of this, and how does former court decisions come into play here?
So there's an FTC law. It's actually on point, and he's done this with other independent agencies as well. We're looking to terminate civil service employees, but with the FTC, the requirement is that a termination by the president can only be for cause. And here he's looking to remove this particular commissioner without cause, which normally would require a showing of malfeasance or negligence. So now it is really a battle of the limits of executive power. There's a Supreme Court decision called Humphrey's Executor. It's from 1935, and that is what upheld the FTC law and this requirement. It's going against what the president and his administration is arguing. Their Second Amendment, Article 2 of the Constitution, Article 2 of the Constitution, their power to run the executive branch. And the argument is that over the past, decades, that the FTC has actually taken on more of an executive type role, so the president should have control. Another issue for the Supreme Court to have finality on that one as well.
Yeah, we know this is part of a broader conversation looking at other independent agencies as well. Lawrence, before you go, since President Trump began his second term, the administration has won 18 of its 25 appeals made to the Supreme Court emergency docket. Put that number into perspective for us. Is that unusual?
Well, the short answer is yes, because it's completely unprecedented to have this number of cases coming up to the court so quickly on an emergency basis. Just as an comparison, the Biden administration had 19 requests that it made to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis in 4 years. So the Trump administration has already surpassed that. And before that, the Obama administration, the Bush administration just had a tiny number of these cases coming up to the court. This has really accelerated, and it's kind of been turbocharged by the Trump administration, where almost any ruling from a district court judge that they don't like, they consider that to be an emergency. And when they say it's an emergency, it seems like the Supreme Court acts like it's an emergency and generally rules in their favor.
Misty and Lawrence, thanks so much for weighing in on this conversation.